All praises, all praises, all praises to the heavenly, holy, almighty creator of eternity, infinity, the universe, the stars, the earth, the mountains, the oceans, the valleys, the seas, the clouds, all creeping things, humanity, and all there is. This is Revelations.unveiled.Detroit. Hello, family. We are back together again, converging on the Revelations.unveiled.Detroit den, where we are at the threshold of transmission and transition, where we surrender our carnal commonalities and expose our cranial universes and bear forth our souls to receive the holy cosmic communication and information of the holy power of all imagination. All praises, and to the scattered tribes, wherever you may sojourn on planet Earth, I love you, and my continuous petition and prayer for your care, safety, and harmony. And to my brothers and sisters, the pending Israelites of the world, who refer to themselves as the melanated and Moors, the original man and children of God, the sovereign and sojourners, the copper-colored, the colored and people of color, the aboriginals and indigenous, the natives, Negroes and niggas, the African Americans and blacks, the descendants of slaves, and those conquered and colonized. Oh yes, family, my continuous and most humble petition to you for the appreciation and the participation at the Revelations.unveiled channel. And we are in the warm den, where we will descend and begin our review of the historical and the visual presentation of the consequences and circumstances of the holy nation. Oh yes, and we are blessed, and we continue to extend our appreciation for the blessing and the grace of the gift and breath of life as we continue on our burgeoning and blossoming, awakening back to the initiation of the reconciliation of the holy nation, back to the holy covenant. And tonight, with the greatest level of humility and the greatest level of love for the family, we will be having a reading of one of the historical events of the exiled Israelites of the Americas, as we continue to align our true heritage and identity and history back to the biblical prophecies that befell us of Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. And we shall begin tonight's presentation entitled How African Babies Were Used as Alligator Bait During Slavery in America. And so, without much ado, because we have much to do, we shall begin at the Revelations.unveiled.Detroit channel standards in the book of Malachi, chapter 3, verse 6. For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, you sons of Jacob are not consumed. Followed by our second heavenly eternal standard in the book of Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 8. In reference to the holy anointed Messiah, the wonderful, the Savior, the Redeemer, the King of Israel, whom the world refers to as Jesus Christ, the same yesterday and today and forever. And family, as a continuation of our reconciliation mentally back to the holy covenant, we pass by the holy prophet, brother Isaiah, in the 28th chapter of his scroll, verses 9 through 11. Whom shall he teach knowledge? And whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breasts. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line. Here a little, and there a little, for with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people. Oh yes, family. And as we get upon the expressway of the elevation and escalation and expansion of our mental marination and deliberation and contemplation, as we continue to learn and discern, as we bring into one fold all of the philosophies of the brothers and sisters of the world. We are Israelites, the lost sheep of the nation of Israel, scattered abroad into all nations for the disobedience of our forefathers to the holy covenant between the nation and the holy power creator of all. And we began how African babies were used as alligator bait during slavery in America. In 1418 BC, Herodotus, the Greek philosopher, who is known as the father of history, said, "A man who does not know anything about the events that took place before he or she was born will remain forever a child." We must go a step further by saying that any human being who refuses to learn from his or her history is condemned to repeating its mistakes, and as such will share the same fate in the consequences of such mistakes. Africa is a continent rich in history. As we enjoy telling stories of our golden past, it is important that we also give a complete and undiluted account of our journey through slavery and man's inhumanity to man, of all atrocities committed against the enslaved Africans in the Americas and Europe. The use of babies as alligator bait is one which leaves anyone with a conscience, with a tear in the eye, imagining that the child in question was yours, would send shivers down your spine. These things are not easy to say, but we must say them for posterity's sake and for the sake of the present and future. Alligator bait, also called gator bait, was the evil practice of using infant African children as bait to lure alligators out from water to land. This practice was popular in Louisiana and Florida and other parts of the South in America. During that era, there was a high demand for alligator skins, which were used in the production of leather shoes, jackets, belts, and other leather materials. Alligator skin was very profitable in the 1800s through 1900s, but the hunters often had accidents and lost their arms or lives as they rustled the swampy waters in their attempt to attract the alligators to the surface at night. So their other viable option was to steal slave babies and use them as bait. They didn't find any rodents or chickens or rabbits or little goats. Those were too valuable. It had to be a baby that a woman carried for 9 months under intense pain, brutality, and hard work. This account has been denied by many in their attempt to cover up this atrocity, but there are oral accounts, documentaries, and publications to substantiate our right to closure, empathy, and healing. In 1923, a publication on Time magazine reported that from Chipley, Florida, it was reported that colored babies were being used for alligator bait. The infants were left to play in shallow water while expert riflemen watched from concealment nearby. When a saurian approached his prey, he is shot by the rifleman. The Chipley Chamber of Commerce said the story was a silly lie, false, and absurd. Maybe so, but it was widely reported in the American press. So it was at least believable among white Americans at the time. To give further evidence of this vile practice, photos and postcards found in the Jim Crow Museum shed clear light on this. A man in Florida had a picture framed and put on his wall showing 9 naked little African boys with the words "alligator bait" written below. To further buttress this account, on June 3, 1908, the Washington Times reported that a zookeeper at a New York zoological gardens baited alligators with pickaninnies out of their winter quarters. He sent 2 African slave children into the enclosure that was housing alligators and crocodiles, numbering more than 25. The reptiles had to be let out of their winter tanks into the summer tanks so they could be seen by people. They didn't find any other way to do this other than placing these children in the tank to lure the alligators and crocodiles out. How artistic. The article read that 2 small colored children happened to drift through the reptile house among the throng of visitors, and they were pressed into service. The alligators wobbled out as quick as they could after the ebony mites, who darted around the tank just as the pursuing monsters fell with grunts of chagrin into the water. The alligators were coaxed into their summer quarters by plump little Africans. There were sources who claimed that the mothers were paid $2 for their babies to be used as bait. They also claimed that the babies were not hurt, but those were just false accounts to hide the heinous crimes. Which sane mother would allow her infant to be tied with a rope around the neck and kept by the river or lake banks as bait? No mother would do that. And at the time, African slaves could not read or write, so how did they read the adverts and apply, as some sources have claimed? Such lies could be found in the September 21, 1923 headline of the Oakland Tribune, which read, "Pickaninny bait lures voracious gator to death, and mother gets her black baby back in perfect condition. Also, $2. It is indeed very callous for a person to risk a baby's life in such manner and then go ahead to justify it with charming words. In an article by T.W. Villiers Chronicles, the gator bait process was described thus: "These little black morsels are more than glad to be led to the sacrifice and do their part in lurking and luring the big Florida gators to their fate without suffering so much as a scratch. But on the contrary, oral accounts of this practice report that most times the babies are eaten by the alligator before the hunters shoot at it. The hunters would sometimes aim to kill the alligator only after the baby was in its jaws. Evidence of this is found in the postcards, pictures, and trinkets they made at the time to commemorate this practice." There are other articles that claim that African slave infants were not only regularly used as alligator bait, but violently skinned alive in preparation for this. We believe the smell of the blood and wounded flesh was meant to attract alligators. There was an account by the grandson of a man who used to engage in this business of gator baiting, and this is what he had to say. The slaves who had babies, they would steal the babies during the course of the day, sometimes when their mothers weren't watching. Some would be infants, some would be a year old. He said some would be toddlers. He said they would grab these children and take them down to the swamp and leave them in pens like little chicken coops. They would go down there at night, take these babies and tie them up, put a rope around their neck and around their torso, around here, and tie it tight. They'd be screaming. What they were doing would help them to churn the water. He said they would throw the babies in tied to this rope. He said in a matter of minutes, he said the alligators were on them. He said the alligator would clamp his jaws on that child. As a matter of fact, once he clamped on them, he would really swallow them. He said you couldn't see anything but the rope. Some would be infants. Some would be a year old, toddlers. Some would be infants. Some of these evil and unimaginable practices by slave owners in America could also be found in the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia in Michigan, USA. Shelved in the museum alongside the many stereotypical representations of pickaninnies, a racial slur applied to African American youngsters. Speaking fractured English, eating watermelon, catching possums, etc. are similar cartoonish portrayals of black children and sometimes black adults as worthless alligator baits, according to accounts. The practice of using African slave children as alligator bait could also be found in movies and popular music and lullaby, Mammy's Little Alligator Bait, composed by Henry Wise and Sidney Perrin in the year 1899. There is a deliberate attempt by those who carried out slavery to hide these parts of slave history. Not much is done by them to apologize and make reparations for these hideous crimes against humanity. Trying to defend this actually adds more grief to the descendants of the African slaves, being that their children are still killed in America today. The world asks the African diaspora to forget these things. They say those were crimes committed and their victims are long dead, so let the history die with them. But they soon forget that the Jews still remember and talk about the Holocaust every year. Japan remembers and commemorates the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima. So why should the African diaspora shut up about the crimes against them? Studies have shown that the legacy of the events of slavery still affects African Americans' mental health. This is because trauma can be transferred from mother to child, and no one knows how many generations that psychological trauma can travel. These accounts of painful history is meant to provide knowledge and also help the African diaspora community in tackling these traumas. We should forgive, but we must never forget. All right, family, that was a reading of the historical documentation and practice of gator bait, the taking and capturing of small little so-called African, but the actual Israelite babies enslaved in the Americas. Those babies taken, stolen from their mothers and tied and used as lures to bring up vicious wild animals to be used in commercial trade and sale. That is why America does not want to view, look, understand, or accept so-called African American history. It is the direct contradiction of the Constitution. All men are created equal. All people are, under natural law, have the ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. But not if you are a slave. So family, as we continue to pull and grab and come into review and consciousness of these historical perspectives of our existence in America, remember, we are the children of the covenant. And here at this channel, we are reviewing the spiritual aspect of the carnal existence. Lord willing, we shall return and continue with the growth and expansion and escalation and elevation of excellence of our mental preparation in the reconciliation of the holy nation back to the covenant. And until we are together again, I love you. I love you. I love you. This is Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verses 6 through 9. For we are a holy people unto the Lord our God. The Lord our God has chosen us to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love upon us, nor choose us because we were more in number than any people, for we were the fewest of all people. But because the Lord loved us, and because he would keep the oath which he had sworn to our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has the Lord brought us out with a mighty hand and redeemed us out of the house of bondmen from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Verse 9. Know therefore that the Lord our God, he is God, the faithful God, which keeps covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. The book of Joel, chapter 2, verse 27. And you shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and none else, and my people shall never be ashamed.